Germany of those years lived not only by weapons and ideology, it was surrounded by secret projects, mystical rituals, and disappeared artifacts. World War II gave birth to many legends, but behind the known facts there are shadows of even stranger stories. These mysteries are rarely mentioned in textbooks, but they still frighten and fascinate researchers. This is already the second part about Germany of those years, because what it hid cannot be revealed in one video, but we are again getting closer to solving their mystery. The secret of the bell. Among the many mysterious projects attributed to Nazi Germany, a special place is occupied by the bell, a device known as Die Glock. It is described as one of the most secret experiments, surrounded by legends and rumors that go far beyond conventional military technology. Stories about the bell appeared in the post-war years and quickly acquired the character of a mystical myth, where the boundary between science and religion was blurred. Fiction and possible reality remains unclear. According to some researchers, the project was developed at the end of the war in the secret Ries base in the Silesian mountains. The bell was supposedly a huge cylinder or bell-shaped metal vessel covered with strange symbols and reliefs. It was several meters high and contained rotating elements surrounded by heavy cables and protective structures. Mysterious substances were used to operate the device, including so-called black metal or Sirius mercury, a substance that no one has yet been able to identify. The nature of the experiments remains a matter of debate. Some sources claim that the bell was part of a program to create a new form of energy that could change the course of the war. Others associate it with projects in the field of gravity and anti-gravity, suggesting that it was intended to be a prototype of a flying machine resembling a flying saucer. Still others claim that it was about time experiments. The machine could allegedly affect space and time, creating anomalies and displacements. Legends describe the bell's testing as having catastrophic consequences. Plants and animals died around the installation, radiation flares and space distortions were observed. People nearby suffered from illnesses and strange symptoms, as if the machine itself was affecting their internal organs. Locals told of nights when an ominous glow rose from the mountain complexes and the air vibrated with an invisible force. After the war, all documentation of the project disappeared. The scientists who supposedly worked on it were either killed or disappeared without a trace. The Allies found the underground complexes of Ries, but found no trace of the bell there. This gave rise to even more rumors. Some believe that the device was taken to South America along with the fleeing SS officers. Others are sure that it fell into the hands of the USA or the USSR and became the basis for post-war research in the field of space and quantum physics. Today, Die Glocke remains one of the most mysterious legends of World War II. For some, it is a pure myth, created on the basis of rumors and speculation. For others, it is a real project, so dangerous that its traces were destroyed. But in any case, the story of the bell reminds us that Nazi Germany sought power not only in weapons and the army, but also in forbidden knowledge that could change the very nature of the world. Project Kronos and rumors of time manipulation. Among the many myths surrounding the secret experiments of Nazi Germany, a special place is occupied by the story of the so-called Kronos project. According to rumors, it was connected with attempts to interfere with time and space, and its developers sought to create a device capable of changing the course of history. Unlike the usual military programs, this project existed rather at the intersection of science, occultism, and fantasy, and this is what made it one of the most disturbing mysteries of the war. The legend of Kronos emerged after the end of World War II, when hints of research in the field of time began to appear in declassified documents and oral stories of former SS employees. Supposedly, Experiments were conducted in secret laboratories associated with the Ahnenerbe Society, using powerful electromagnetic fields and substances reminiscent of the substance from the Bell experiments. The goal was to create a time chamber, a space where the flow of time would differ from the usual. Some accounts claim that strange effects were observed in these experiments. Objects inside the chamber changed color, aged or deteriorated at an abnormal rate. Watches showed different readings, and animals placed in the apparatus died under mysterious circumstances. There were also bolder claims that in some cases it was possible to capture moments from the past or even images of the future, as if the machine were causing temporary flashes. There is a version that the Kronos project was closely connected with ideas about Vril energy and esoteric theories popular among German occultists. In these visions, time was not linear, but was seen as a flow that could be tapped into and changed. Reich leaders believed that if they could gain control over time, Germany could avoid defeat and gain eternal dominance. Another part of the legend is connected with the disappearance of some high-ranking SS officers in the last months of the war. According to rumors, they allegedly participated in the last experiments of Kronos and could have been moved in an unknown way. This version sounds fantastic, but it gave rise to numerous stories about some Nazis who managed to leave time and therefore were never found. After the war, no confirmed documentation of the project was found. However, references to Kronos appeared in Allied archives, as well as in the memoirs of people who studied the legacy of the Ahnenerbe. Some researchers believe that such rumors may have inspired post-war projects in the US and USSR related to psychophysics and experiments with space-time effects. The history of the Kronos project remains on the border between myth and reality. Perhaps all this is just a conspiracy theory interpretation of rumors about physics, experiments that were unsuccessful, or perhaps the secret laboratories of the Third Reich really did try to go beyond the familiar world and touch the very nature of time. In any case, the legend of Kronos underlines the readiness of the Nazi elite to turn to the most fantastic and dangerous ideas for the sake of their dream of a 1,000-year Reich. Experiments on creating combat zombies in camps. Among the many horror stories associated with the camps of Nazi Germany, a special place is occupied by rumors about attempts to create so-called battle zombies. This legend, surrounded by horror and darkness, combines real facts about cruel medical experiments and speculation that the Nazis tried to turn prisoners into weak-willed soldiers, devoid of fear and pain. Death camps have long been a symbol of inhumanity, but archives and testimonies of former prisoners contain references to guinea pigs who were subjected to experiments with psychotropic substances and serums. The goal was to change a person's psyche, to make them completely controllable. It is said that SS doctors tested substances that cause complete suppression of will and emotions, turning people into creatures that acted automatically, following commands. Some evidence suggests that similar experiments were conducted in the Dachau and Sachsenhausen camps. Prisoners were injected with combinations of drugs and toxins, operated on without anesthesia, and tested with chemicals that affected the brain. Participants in these experiments often died in terrible agony, but doctors recorded even the most minor changes in behavior. Legends claim that several times it was possible to achieve a state where a person stopped responding to pain and continued to follow simple orders. Rumors said that the aim of such research was to create squads of living machines that could fight without fear, fatigue, or pity. Such ideas combine pseudoscience and occultism. Some researchers claim that the Wewelsburg rituals spoke of resurrected warriors who would be guided into battle by the spirits of their ancestors. As a result, Medical experiments and mystical ideas were intertwined, creating a terrifying image of battle zombies. After the war, no official documents were found about such experiments, but rumors and stories of former prisoners survived. The memoirs mention people with empty eyes, whom the guards used for weapons testing and training. Some researchers believe that it was these eerie observations that gave rise to the legend of zombie Nazis, which later spread into popular culture. Historians note that experiments with psychotropic substances aimed at suppressing consciousness were indeed conducted in the camps, but the idea of creating combat zombies rather reflects the fear of how far the Nazi machine could go in its experiments. This legend combines the horror of real experiments, mystical ideas about resurrection, and post-war speculation. Today, stories of Nazi battle zombies remain part of the war's grim legacy. They are a reminder that the brutal experiments in the camps not only killed people, but also became the basis for myths in which the line between reality and nightmare is blurred. Zombies may never have appeared, but the idea that people tried to turn prisoners into mindless creatures is as terrifying as any legend. Mysterious disappearances of rune hunting expeditions in Norway. Northern Europe always held a special place in the imagination of the Nazi elite. For Heinrich Himmler and the Ahnenerbe, Norway was not just a territory of strategic importance, but a sacred land where traces of the ancestral homeland of the Germans could be hidden in rocks, caves, and ancient sanctuaries. Particular attention was paid to runes, symbols that were considered keys to ancient power. It was in this search that one of the darkest legends about lost expeditions in Norway was born. In the early 1940s, the SS organized several small research teams to the northern parts of Norway. They were supposed to study geology and folklore, but the surviving evidence tells a different story. The expeditions were tasked with finding ancient runic stones associated with myths about gods and heroes. According to legends, such stones could contain not only texts, but also magical power capable of influencing reality. Locals recalled strange groups in black uniforms who would appear in villages, question the elders about ancient legends, and then head off into the mountains loaded with boxes and equipment. Several times, these groups never returned. Allied reports after the liberation of Norway mentioned disappeared expeditions whose tracks were lost in the snowy wastes. Only occasionally were abandoned camps found, where tents remained untouched and food supplies lay in place, as if the people had vanished without a trace. One of the most terrifying accounts comes from a diary kept by an officer. It describes how the group came to an ancient cave with runes carved into the walls that glowed in the dark. The entries end with a description of a strange hum coming from the depths and a feeling that stones are looking at us. The diary was later found to be a forgery, but its contents match the oral histories of local residents who claim that some caves in the mountains cannot be opened. After the war, interest in the story increased. Archives contained references to missing troops and strange expeditions, but there was no concrete evidence of the existence of magic runes. Nevertheless, the fact that people disappeared remains disturbing. Even if they died due to avalanches or harsh conditions, the fact that their search was connected with runic symbols gives the story a dark tone. Today, this legend is perceived as part of the Ahnenerbe mythology. Some believe that the expeditions really did try to find ancient artifacts, but disappeared in the harsh mountains. Others believe it is a deliberate hoax, designed to add an aura of mystery to the Nazi project. But either way, the mystery of the missing expeditions in Norway remains another reminder of the lengths to which the Nazis went in their search for forbidden knowledge. The mystical history of the Order of the Black Knights in the SS. Among the many rumors about the secret projects of the Third Reich, a special place is occupied by the story of the so-called Order of the Black Knights within the SS. This legend is intertwined with real rituals in the Wewelsburg castle and fantasies about how the top SS leadership tried to create a closed group of selected officers who were not just soldiers, but priests of a dark cult. According to legend, the initiator of the order was Heinrich Himmler. He dreamed of reproducing a structure similar to the medieval Templars, where the elite united into a brotherhood, bound by oaths, secret rituals, and symbols. In his view, the SS was to become not only a military force, but also a spiritual order called upon to control the fate of the people. However, within this order, according to rumors, there was an even more closed circle, the Black Knights. Legends say that only 12 officers, personally selected by Himmler, could become members of the secret brotherhood. They met in Wewelsburg in special rooms where the symbol of the black sun shone on the floor. There, they performed rituals in which fire, blood, and runes served as sacred elements. It was believed that these people were bound by an oath to preserve knowledge of the magical power of the Reich and to sacrifice everything for its future. There are reports of strange ceremonies reminiscent of ancient Germanic mysteries. Torches, stone altars, runic incantations, all of this was meant to reinforce the feeling of belonging to an eternal order. Some witnesses claim that sacrifices were made at these meetings, animals or even humans, although there is no documentary evidence of this. But the very idea that SS officers participated in bloody rites adds a terrifying tone to the story. After the war, the Allies did indeed find rooms in Wewelsburg that were specially equipped for rituals, halls with round stone niches, altars, and symbols carved into the floor, but no direct evidence of the existence of the Order of the Black Knights was found. However, many researchers believe that the cult structure of the SS was built in such a way that such an inner circle could well have existed. The myth of the Black Knights has become part of popular culture. It has inspired books, films, and theories that the war was not just a clash of armies, but also a struggle between secret orders. For some, the story is a symbol of fanaticism and mystical madness. For others, it is a reminder that the Nazis were trying to combine the war machine with an occult religion. Today, it is difficult to say whether the Black Knights were real or just a reflection of fears and conjectures. But the very fact that such rumors existed and found an echo speaks to how dark and mysterious the SS cult was. And it is precisely this ambiguity that makes the legend of the Order of the Black Knights one of the most terrible mysteries of World War II. Mysterious tunnels under Nuremberg, where secret rituals were performed. Nuremberg is best known as the site of grand party rallies, where the Nazis staged massive parades, turning the city into an arena for their propaganda. But behind the facade of solemn columns and Albert Speer architecture lay another side. Legends of underground tunnels that ran beneath the old city and were used for secrets inaccessible to ordinary citizens. It was these tunnels that became the subject of rumors about SS rituals and mystical rites that allegedly took place deep in the earth. Historically, there was indeed an extensive underground system under Nuremberg dating back to medieval times. They housed wine cellars, warehouses, and shelters. However, with the arrival of the Nazis, some of these tunnels were rebuilt and expanded. According to some studies, new passages were dug there, leading to buildings associated with the party leadership. Officially, they were used for protection and storage of property, but rumors claim that secret meetings and rituals took place in the deepest halls. Locals told of nightly torchlight processions, when SS officers disappeared into the dungeons and returned only in the morning. A hum similar to chanting could be heard from underground, and sometimes sharp sounds of blows, as if strange ceremonies were taking place there. It was believed that these tunnels were connected with the cult of ancestors and the symbolism of runic magic. There are references to the fact that it was in Nuremberg that the so-called initiation rites were held. SS recruits who had reached a certain rank had to go through tunnels and take an oath in an underground hall by torchlight. There, according to legend, there were stone altars with engraved symbols, and the walls were decorated with images reminiscent of the Black Sun. After the war, the Allies did explore some of the underground structures. They found rooms with unusual architecture, round halls with domed ceilings, stone platforms, clearly not intended for economic purposes, but no documents directly confirming the rituals were found. Nevertheless, these findings became the basis for many hypotheses. Some researchers believe that the underground tunnels were used for secret meetings, while others are sure that we are talking about mystical practices that played a role in the ideology of the SS. Interestingly, rumors about ritual tunnels continued to live on after the war. Local residents claimed that some entrances were permanently walled up, and the authorities were reluctant to talk about the real scale of the underground system. This only increased the aura of mystery and fueled the theory that some of the Reich's secrets remained hidden in the depths beneath Nuremberg. Today, the tunnels beneath the city are only partially open to tourists, but the dungeon's dark reputation remains. They are seen as a symbol of the dark, mystical side that always lurked behind the Reich's ceremonial facade. Legends of secret SS rituals in the Nuremberg tunnels remain part of the mythology of World War II, raising questions about how many of these stories were made up and how many actually happened in the dark depths beneath the ancient city. Rumors of a Reich agreement with Tibetan oracles about the power of the ancestors. Among the many stories connected with the SS expedition to Tibet in the late 30s, a special place is occupied by rumors about secret negotiations between German officers and Tibetan oracles. These mystical figures in the Buddhist tradition were considered intermediaries between the world of people and spiritual forces, keepers of prophecies and secret knowledge. For the Nazi elite, obsessed with searching for Aryan roots and sources of ancient energy, contact with such people was of particular value. According to legend, during the German expedition's stay in Lhasa, secret meetings were held with lamas and oracles, during which the idea of the so-called ancestral power was discussed. In the Tibetan tradition, this was understood as spiritual energy that connects generations, allowing one to receive support and protection from the dead. For the Tibetans, this was part of a religious teaching based on respect for the past and an awareness of the cyclical nature of life. But for the SS officers, such ideas seemed like proof of the reality of a mystical force that could be used for military purposes. Rumors claim that Tibetan oracles performed rituals for the Germans using masks, drums, and meditation. These rites were supposed to summon the spirits of ancient warriors to share their energy with the living. The Germans took this as practical confirmation of their own ideas about ancestor worship, which Heinrich Himmler had placed particular emphasis on. There is a version that a kind of agreement was concluded between the SS and Tibetan lamas. Spiritual teachers shared knowledge about rituals and symbols, and the Germans promised support in opposing British influence in the region. There is no documentary evidence of this, but after the war, there were rumors that some Tibetan monks actually ended up in Berlin and accompanied the Nazis in their final months. To the Allies, the story seemed like part of the Reich's occult obsession, but to researchers of mystical traditions, contacts with oracles could be quite real. The SS expedition was not limited to collecting plant and animal samples. It was clearly looking for knowledge that had nothing to do with science in the usual sense. Rumors of a treaty have intensified after the discovery of photographs showing German officers surrounded by lamas. Some of the pictures show objects resembling ritual artifacts, which has become an additional argument for those who believe in the reality of secret negotiations. Today, it is impossible to separate fact from fiction. Perhaps the Germans did participate in and observe rituals without understanding their true meaning. Perhaps they interpreted Tibetan religious practices as evidence for their own theories about the power of blood and ancestors. But the very fact that such stories existed and resonated speaks to how deeply Nazi ideology sought to rely on mystical notions. The legend of the Reich's pact with Tibetan oracles has become part of the dark mythology of World War II. It reminds us that for the SS leaders, the spiritual teachings of the East were not just exotic, but a potential weapon that could strengthen their power and give the war the aura of a sacred mission. Legends about the Wehrmacht's ghost divisions that allegedly appeared in battle. Among the many scary and strange stories of World War II, a special place is occupied by the stories of the so-called ghost divisions of the Wehrmacht. These legends appeared both among Allied soldiers and civilians, who claimed that detachments of German troops appeared on the battlefields, left no traces, and disappeared as suddenly as they appeared. According to the recollections of some frontline soldiers, such stories were most often associated with battles on the Eastern Front. Soviet soldiers said that on foggy mornings or during snowstorms, they saw entire columns of German soldiers moving almost silently. Their faces were covered in shadows, their uniforms looked darkened and strangely distorted, and their steps left no traces in the snow. When the shooting began, these figures seemed to dissolve into thin air. On the Western Front, similar stories were told. During night battles in Normandy, Allied troops were alleged to encounter squads that would suddenly appear on their flanks, causing panic. Soldiers claimed to see torchlight and hear battle cries, but when they approached, they found no bodies or weapons. For some, this was a manifestation of fatigue and war psychosis, but rumors of ghost divisions persisted. Historians explain these legends by several reasons. Firstly, fog, snowfalls, and night battles could easily cause optical illusions. Secondly, strong tension and fear often led to collective hallucinations. But there were other versions. In mystical circles, it was believed that the SS and the Ahnenerbe attempted to use occult practices to summon ancestral spirits or create illusory armies. There are rumors that rituals were held at Wewelsburg where officers attempted to summon shadow warriors to support soldiers on the battlefield. The evidence of ghost divisions was also supported by strange coincidences. In some cases, battles were reported in which German units allegedly demonstrated incredible tenacity, although by all calculations their forces should have been exhausted. This gave the legend even more gloom, as if the soldiers of the Reich were not fighting alone, but with the support of forces from another world. After the war, rumors of phantom armies did not disappear. On the contrary, they became part of the mythology of the Second World War. In the villages of Eastern Europe and Normandy, stories are still told of columns of soldiers in old uniforms passing by in silence and disappearing into the darkness on foggy nights. Locals consider this an echo of war or a curse on the land where blood was spilled. Today it is difficult to say whether the ghost divisions were the result of deliberate mystical experiments or merely the product of fear and fatigue. But the fact remains, the war gave birth not only to real armies of flesh and steel, but also to armies of shadows and legends that continue to live in the memory of generations. A program to search for the sonic weapon of the gods in Iceland. Northern Europe has long been surrounded by legends of ancient gods, giants, and miraculous artifacts hidden in volcanoes and mountains. For the Nazi elite, especially the Ahnenerbe, these lands were not only the cradle of Scandinavian myths, but also a possible source of real power. That is why rumors appeared in the early 1940s about a program aimed at finding the so-called sound weapons of the gods in Iceland. According to legend, Icelandic sagas contained references to mysterious stones that emitted powerful vibrations capable of destroying walls and killing enemies. In the Nazi interpretation, this was perceived not as a poetic metaphor, but as a hint at a real weapon lost since ancient times. It was believed that if these stones or their analogs could be found, Germany would be able to reproduce the technology and create a new means of waging war. German research teams actually went to Iceland under the guise of geological expeditions. Officially, they studied volcanic activity and glaciers, but locals recalled strange people who asked old people about ancient tales and looked for caves where, according to legend, there were once sanctuaries. Sometimes the expeditions were accompanied by military engineers, which gave the research an even more sinister tone. According to rumors, during one of the expeditions, the Germans found unusual stone slabs in the lava fields with symbols carved into them that resembled runes. When they were struck with metal objects, a strange hum was heard that lasted longer than the usual sound. For a simple observer, this might have been just an acoustic effect, but for the mystics of the Ahnenerbe, it looked like proof of the existence of the sound weapon of the gods. Eyewitness accounts claim that the Germans tried to reproduce the effect in laboratories, building resonance chambers and experimenting with ultrasound. However, the results were extremely dangerous. Glass was broken and hearing damage was caused to participants during indoor testing. Legends claim that several scientists died after being exposed to vibrations that could not be stopped. After the war, no confirmed documents about the sonic weapon were found. But references to unusual German expeditions to Iceland were preserved, and some of the found artifacts disappeared from museums. This gave rise to the theory that the Allies took them for their own research. Today, the legend of the sound weapon of the gods is perceived as a mixture of myth and real scientific experiments with acoustics. Perhaps the Germans really did study resonance phenomena and hoped to use them for military purposes. But even if the weapon was never created, the idea itself underlines how far the Nazis were willing to go in trying to combine ancient myths and modern technology. Experiments in weather control for military purposes. Among the many ideas that obsessively occupied the Third Reich leadership, a special place was occupied by the idea that the weather could be turned into a weapon. For the Nazi elite, who believed in the power of science and mysticism at the same time, control over the elements did not seem like a fantasy, but a task worthy of the most secret laboratories. Rumors that Germany was attempting to develop projects to change the climate and control rain, storms, and fogs emerged during the war and are still controversial. Initial experiments allegedly began with attempts to create artificial clouds and fogs that could obscure troop movements. Archives contain references to programs using chemicals to create smoke screens, but anecdotal evidence suggests much more ambitious plans. In particular, some researchers claim that in the vicinity of Dachau and other secret centers, experiments were conducted with generators that created powerful electrical discharges to cause artificial thunderstorms. Stories from former prisoners forced to work at these facilities tell of strange installations that resembled giant metal towers with wires running into the ground. When they were turned on, the air would fill with the smell of ozone, and the sky would seem to sway. Sometimes thunderstorms did occur after such tests, but whether they were the result of experiments or just a coincidence is an open question. Militarily, the Nazis dreamed of using the weather as a strategic weapon. They imagined that they could flood enemy positions with artificial rain, cause a blizzard to paralyze an offensive, or create a thick fog to hide German air attacks. Combined with their belief in the mysticism of the elements, such plans were perceived not as madness, but as part of a global struggle for world power. A special place is occupied by rumors that similar experiments were conducted in Norway, where the geography and climate allowed testing hypotheses about summoning storms. According to one version, the SS expeditions were looking for ancient rune stones, which were believed to be associated with wind control. These legends intertwine real scientific attempts with mysticism, creating an image of projects in which electricity and occult rituals were combined into one. After the war, no evidence was found that the Nazis had actually learned to control the weather. However, the research itself did not seem fantastic. In the post-war decades, the US and the USSR actually conducted climate weapons projects, trying to cause rain or disperse clouds. This suggests that rumors of Nazi experiments may have had some real roots in the ideas. Today, the theme of weather control remains part of the dark mythology of the Third Reich. Perhaps the Germans only dreamed of power over the elements, and their experiments were limited to primitive methods. But the idea itself emphasizes the boundlessness of their ambitions. They sought to subjugate not only people and lands, but also the sky with its rains, winds, and thunderstorms. The history of the Lone Wolf cult, a secret sect within the SS. Within the SS, there were not only the official rituals developed by Heinrich Himmler, but also semi-legal mystical groups that gave the order an even more sinister tone. One such structure, about which there were persistent rumors, was the so-called Cult of the Lone Wolf. Its existence has never been documented, but eyewitness accounts and scraps of evidence paint a picture of a secret sect operating in the shadow of the official hierarchy. The name Lone Wolf was not accidental. For the SS, this image symbolized a warrior who does not depend on the crowd and is able to act alone, led only by willpower and spirit. Himmler admired Germanic myths about hermit warriors and predatory animals, and this symbol gradually acquired a cult significance. Within the secret sect, the image of the wolf began to be associated with the spirits of ancestors and ancient gods to whom sacrifices were made. According to some legends, only officers who had proven exceptional loyalty to the order could join the Cult of the Lone Wolf. Initiation took place in forests or underground halls, by torchlight and runic symbols. The recruit had to pass the test of solitude. He was left alone in the mountains or forest for several days without food or weapons, so that he would return reborn by connecting with the spirits of nature. Those who returned were considered wolves, ready for any mission. Rumors claim that members of this sect took part in secret combat missions, where they acted alone as hunters. They were called Dark Scouts, and were believed to be able to instill panic in the enemy. Stories about such figures were also passed on among enemy soldiers. Lone SS officers who would suddenly appear from the forest, kill, and disappear, creating an aura of mysticism around the German troops. Animal sacrifices, most often wolves, occupied a special place in cult rituals. Their blood was used in rituals where SS officers swore to be faithful to the pack and alone in battle. These stories sound creepy, but they echo known facts. The SS really did have a cult of blood and animal symbolism. After the war, some former officers recalled the Lone Wolf cult during interrogations, but their words remain contradictory. Some claimed that it was just a legend to intimidate new recruits. Others admitted to participating in night meetings where oaths were taken and strange rituals were performed. Today, it is difficult to separate fact from myth. Perhaps the cult existed as a small group of fanatics within the SS. Perhaps it was a fabrication to heighten the aura of fear. But the idea that such sects could arise within the Nazi order only underscores how deeply the Reich's ideology permeated mysticism and how dark its manifestations were. Secret research of the Celtic Druids in Brittany. Nazi Germany paid special attention to the cult traditions of Europe, and one of the areas of interest of the Ahnenerbe Society was the study of Celtic Druids. Brittany, A region in northwestern France kept many legends about druidic rites, stone circles, and forests, where, according to legend, the priests performed their mysterious rituals. For the Nazis, obsessed with the search for ancient knowledge, these places seemed not just a cultural heritage, but a potential source of sacred power that could be used for military and ideological purposes. According to the testimony of Brittany residents, during the German occupation, special detachments arrived there several times, which were engaged not only in military control but also in archaeological excavations. SS officers visited ancient menhirs and dolmens, photographed runic and spiral symbols, took measurements, and noted the locations of stone circles. Local farmers reported that fires were often lit near such objects at night, and strange chants in German were heard. The archives mention that the purpose of these studies was to compare Celtic cults with Germanic myths. Himmler and his associates were convinced that the Druids had knowledge of natural forces and astronomy that could be used for rituals. There were hypotheses that the stone circles served not only as calendars, but also as energy ports from which the ancient priests drew power. In the eyes of the Nazi mystics, this looked like direct confirmation of their theory of the Northern heritage. Rumors claim that in some cases SS officers themselves attempted to reproduce Druidic rituals. To do so, they used the symbolism of the sun, blood, and earth. Legends say that such rituals involved animal sacrifices and sometimes human sacrifices, although this has not been documented. However, the discovery of knives, bones, and symbolic drawings at excavation sites only fuels interest in these stories. After the war, many Brittany residents claim to have seen the Germans carting away boxes of artifacts, stone fragments with engraved symbols, bronze objects, and even human skulls. These finds were never found by the Allies, giving rise to theories about the creation of secret collections. Some researchers believe that it was in Brittany that the Germans sought a connection with the legendary Druidic spell books that were supposedly passed down from generation to generation orally. Today, it is difficult to separate reality from myth. Certainly, the SS was interested in Celtic cultures and conducted research in France, but how far they went in trying to use Druidic rites for their own purposes remains a mystery. The legend of secret rituals in Brittany shows that the Third Reich was eager to find confirmation of its ideas in any tradition, be it Tibet, Scandinavia, or the lands of the Celts. The mystery of the missing golden runes from the temple in Krakow. The occupation of Poland gave the Nazis access to many ancient temples, churches, and archaeological sites. The Ahnenerbe were particularly interested in the legends about an old temple in Krakow, where artifacts with engraved golden runes were allegedly kept. These symbols were considered not just decoration, but keys to the Aryan heritage, connecting the Germans with ancient sources of power. It is this story that gave rise to the mystery of the missing runes, which remains unsolved to this day. According to local residents, even before the war, in one of the old churches in Krakow, there was a special hall where golden runic symbols were embedded in stone slabs. No one could explain their origin. Some believed that they were part of a medieval cult, others that the symbols appeared in the times of ancient tribes. For ordinary parishioners, they were decorations. But for SS mystics, they were proof of the connection between Slavic and Germanic myths. When the Germans occupied Krakow, the temple was quickly placed under guard. Ahnenerbe officers soon arrived and thoroughly examined the building. Witnesses claimed that they photographed the runes, made plaster casts and copies, and then worked for weeks in the depths of the temple, not allowing anyone in. Later, all the runes disappeared. The stone slabs remained in place, but the gold inserts were carefully cut out and taken away to an unknown location. Legend has it that the runes were a kind of energy code. Each of them symbolized power, victory, fertility, authority, sacrifice. According to one version, Himmler hoped to use them in SS rituals to awaken the energy of the ancestors. According to another, the golden runes were to become part of the Reich's collection of mystical artifacts, along with the search for the Grail and the Spear of Destiny. After the war, the fate of the runes was never determined. There are no documents in the Allied archives confirming their seizure, and Polish sources claim that they disappeared without a trace along with the retreating troops. There were rumors that some of the golden symbols ended up in Nazi caches in Bavaria, but no finds were ever made. A more fantastic version suggests that the runes were taken to Antarctica along with other artifacts to be hidden in a secret base. Today, the mystery of the golden runes remains unsolved. Perhaps it was just a legend born on a wave of mystical fear. Perhaps the runes really existed and became part of the Nazi search for sacred power, but the very fact of their disappearance became a symbol of how the Third Reich turned even sacred temples into laboratories of occult experiments, erasing the boundaries between religion, history, and mania for power. Versions about the Reich's contacts with South American shamans. During World War II, South America was perceived by the Nazis not only as a potential refuge for escape, but also as a territory full of ancient secrets. In the jungles of the Amazon and the Andes, tribes were hiding that had preserved archaic rituals, and the legends of local peoples mentioned gods that came from the sky and artifacts with unusual properties. It was these stories that gave rise to rumors that representatives of the Reich were trying to establish contacts with the shamans of South America in search of knowledge and power that could strengthen the mystical foundation of the Third Reich. According to some sources, in the late 30s, the appearance of German research expeditions was recorded in Brazil and Peru, which were officially engaged in geographical and ethnographic research. In fact, their participants were actively interested in shamanic rituals, collected ritual masks, amulets, and even recorded songs performed during ceremonies. The Ahnenerbe archives allegedly contained reports that described in detail practices involving hallucinogenic plants used by shamans to enter other states of consciousness. Rumors claim that the Germans believed in the possibility of using shamanic rituals to establish contact with ancient spirits, or even higher beings. They were especially interested in legends about teachers from the East who came to the tribes many centuries ago and passed on knowledge. In these stories, the Nazis saw hints of an Aryan heritage and confirmation of their theories that great civilizations always had a common source. There is also a more frightening version. Shamans allegedly shared with the Germans rituals associated with sacrifices and altered states of consciousness. Some eyewitness accounts published after the war mentioned strange ceremonies in which German officers participated with local shamans, drinking plant drinks, and going into trances. During these rituals, they allegedly saw visions of future battles and received messages about the fate of the Reich. After the war, legends about Nazi connections with shamans only grew stronger, especially given that many high-ranking officers actually found refuge in South America. A theory has emerged that it was precisely through early contacts during the war that they prepared escape routes and support from local communities in advance. In some villages in the Amazon and the Andes, stories were told of Germans who came with gifts, who brought weapons and equipment in exchange for participation in secret rituals. There is no documentary evidence of these contacts, but the possibility of their existence does not seem unlikely. South America was little studied, and the Nazis' interest in mysticism was boundless. Even if stories about rituals and alliances with shamans are exaggerated, they reflect the real desire of the Reich to seek power in the most remote corners of the world. Today, the legend of contacts with shamans remains part of the dark mythology of World War II. It reminds us that the Nazis tried to subjugate not only science and weapons, but also the spiritual practices of ancient cultures, turning them into a tool to justify their mad ambitions. The mystery of the missing submarines that went into unknown waters in 1945. In the spring and summer of 1945, as the Third Reich was collapsing under Allied attack, strange stories appeared in naval chronicles about German U-boats that had set out on their last voyage and disappeared without a trace. These U-boats did not surrender or sink. They seemed to have dissolved into the ocean, creating one of the darkest naval mysteries of World War II. According to Allied data, several submarines left ports in Germany and Norway in April and May 1945. Their task was supposedly to deliver cargo and high-ranking officers to secret shelters prepared in advance. After leaving for sea, contact with them was lost, and none of these boats appeared again. The most famous stories were those of the submarines U-530 and U-977, which suddenly surfaced in Argentina months later, causing a storm of rumors about Nazis fleeing to South America. But some of the submarines were never found. According to the official version, they could have perished in the Atlantic, hit mines, or simply sunk due to technical failures. However, the lack of debris and bodies created space for fantastic hypotheses. It was believed that these boats were heading not to regular ports, but to secret bases in Antarctica or even to unknown waters, where, according to legend, passages to another world were hidden. Rumors about the submarines were fueled by the fact that they could transport not only officers, but also strange cargo. Some researchers claimed that they were carrying the Reich's gold reserves, rare artifacts, Ahnenerbe documents, and even prototypes of new weapons. In the post-war years, caches of Nazi relics were actually found in South America, which only added fuel to the versions of the last voyages. There were also more mystical interpretations. In conspiracy theories, the submarines allegedly went into the ocean depths to hide secret technologies, or even set off on a journey to the inner Earth, continuing the myths of polar gates and bases in Antarctica. In such stories, the disappearance of the submarines was not a tragedy, but part of a larger plan to preserve the Reich's occult legacy. After the war, the Allies attempted to investigate the fate of the missing boats, but the results remained contradictory. Reports listed dozens of submarines that had not returned to base, but their destruction was most often attributed to combat. However, the lack of concrete evidence gave rise to many legends. Today, the mystery of the missing submarines remains one of the most fascinating stories of the Second World War. It combines the reality of the last days of the Reich with the myths of Nazi escape, secret bases, and mystical routes leading to unknown waters. Whether these boats were destroyed or actually disappeared into the far corners of the world remains an unanswered question, keeping alive the legend of the last fleet of the Third Reich. The legend of the Book of the Dead Reich. Among the darkest legends associated with the fall of Nazi Germany, a special place is occupied by the story of the so-called Book of the Dead Reich. This name appeared after the war when rumors began to spread in Allied and occult circles that strange manuscripts containing rituals and spells used in SS rites had been found in the ruins of Berlin and the Wewelsburg Castle. According to one version, the book was a thick volume in a black cover, decorated with runes and symbols of the Black Sun. It allegedly contained descriptions of ceremonies associated with the cult of ancestors, bloody sacrifices, and appeals to ancient forces. These rituals were not only meant to strengthen discipline within the SS, but also to provide a spiritual connection to the warriors of the past. The text was said to be written in a mixture of Old German, Latin, and runes, making it difficult for the uninitiated to read. According to legend, the Allies actually found such a manuscript in the spring of 1945. However, it soon disappeared from the archives. Some claim that the book was taken away by the Americans and hidden in secret storage facilities along with the Ahnenerbe documents. Others believe that it fell into the hands of the Soviet secret services, where it was studied in the context of psychotronic weapons programs. There is also a more mystical version. Supposedly, the book itself did not allow itself to be kept by the victors and disappeared mysteriously, leaving behind only rumors. Stories about the Book of the Dead were also fueled by real facts. It is known that in Wewelsburg there were rooms where SS archives were kept, including ritual texts, runic studies, and mystical treatises. After the war, a significant portion of these materials actually disappeared. This gave rise to the theory that the legend about the book grew out of the disappearance of real documents that could have shown how far the SS went in creating its own religion. Some researchers note the similarity of the legend with the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead, a collection of spells for the soul's journey to the afterlife. Perhaps it was this parallel image that inspired the name. In the eyes of mystics, the Book of the Reich looked like an attempt by the Nazis to create their own path to eternity, to consolidate ideology in the form of a sacred text. Today, it is impossible to say whether the Reich Book of the Dead actually existed or was just a figment of the imagination. But the idea itself underlines the desire of the Nazi elite to give their actions an aura of sanctity, to turn cruelty and fanaticism into part of a pseudo-religious cult. The legend of the book remains alive to this day. For some, it is proof that the Allies hid terrible secrets from the world. For others, it is a symbol of myth-making, born from the ruins of war. But the history of the book itself reminds us that, even after the defeat of the Reich, its shadow continues to exist in myths that feed the imagination and disturb the memory of humanity. Stories of ghosts of prisoners haunting the camps after the experiments. The death camps, which became a symbol of the horror of World War II, left not only a historical memory of monstrous crimes, but also many eerie legends. Among them, a special place is occupied by stories about the ghosts of prisoners who allegedly continued to appear in the barracks and laboratories where medical experiments were conducted. These stories emerged immediately after the camps were liberated and are still passed down as part of their grim legacy. Witnesses, both former prisoners and Allied soldiers who entered the camps in 1945, claimed to have felt a strange presence in the empty barracks. Many spoke of an unbearable feeling of cold that could not be explained by the weather, and of a sudden silence, as if the walls themselves were storing screams and moans. In some cases, there were reports of shadows gliding through the corridors and figures that disappeared when approached. There are especially many legends associated with the laboratories where SS doctors conducted experiments on prisoners. Silhouettes of people with mutilated bodies allegedly appeared there, and footsteps and crying were heard. American and Soviet soldiers guarding the camps after liberation also told of cases when guards refused to enter certain buildings at night. For them, this was not just superstition. They claimed to have felt a gaze coming from the void. In Polish and German villages near the former camps, there are stories of locals seeing processions of shadows after the war, moving toward the camp gates and vanishing into thin air. These were believed to be the souls of the dead, unable to find peace because their deaths were painful and unjust. Historians and mystical researchers explain these phenomena differently. Some believe they are the result of psychological trauma. People who saw the horrors of the camps transferred their nightmares into reality. Others point out that such evidence is too numerous and similar to be mere illusions. From a mystical point of view, the camps have become places of broken reality where the boundary between the living and the dead is broken, and that is why ghosts continue to appear. These stories have become ingrained in culture as a reminder that even death does not free souls from pain. Legends of the ghosts of prisoners have become part of the memorial memory. On tours of former camps, guides sometimes mention stories of strange phenomena, emphasizing that the atmosphere of these places remains heavy to this day. Whether this is true or not remains a mystery. But the fact is that the camps of Nazi Germany have become a symbol not only of historical horror but also of mystical darkness. And stories about the ghosts of prisoners sound like a reminder that crimes against humanity leave a mark that cannot be erased even by time. Mystical rituals around the Berlin bunker in the last days of the war. The last days of the Third Reich were filled with chaos, fear, and despair. But along with the military events in Berlin, there were rumors of strange rituals that were supposedly carried out near Hitler's bunker. These rites, according to legend, were supposed to ensure the protection of the Reich and allow the leader and his inner circle to call upon mystical powers in a desperate situation. The evidence is extremely vague. Some Wehrmacht officers interrogated after the war mentioned seeing people in black cloaks entering the basements of buildings near the Reich Chancellery. They said that candles were burning there, and chanting and drumming could be heard. According to one version, they were fanatical SS members who tried to reproduce ancient Germanic rituals in order to appeal to the spirits of their ancestors. According to another, they were mystics from the Ahnenerbe who conducted secret rituals to preserve the soul of the Reich. Particular attention was paid to the symbol of the Black Sun. Legends claim that in one of the underground halls this sign was depicted, and sacrifices were made in front of it, most often animals. It was believed that such sacrifices should provide energy for the transition of the Reich to another form. The very expression, another form, gave rise to many guesses, from an attempt to call for victory to the idea of resurrection of the Reich in the future. Some researchers believe that rumors about rituals are connected with the desperate measures taken by the Nazis when military disaster became obvious. In such circumstances, belief in a miracle or supernatural help became the last hope. Participation in rituals could have been a way to maintain morale or at least create the illusion that defeat could be postponed. After the war, the Allies did indeed find strange artifacts in the underground rooms of Berlin. Runic inscriptions, metal amulets, symbolic drawings. Some of them ended up in the archives of the secret services, some disappeared. These finds supported the version that rituals were held near the bunker in the last days of the war. However, there is no evidence of their scale and influence on the events. Nevertheless, stories of mystical rituals became part of the mythology of the Third Reich. They underline that until the very end, its elite remained obsessed with the idea of the sacred dimension of war. Even when the enemy armies were already at the walls of Berlin, for some Nazis, the struggle was perceived not only as a military clash, but also as a magical battle in which all forces, including otherworldly ones, had to be used. Today, these legends are seen as symbols of despair and fanaticism. Perhaps rituals were indeed carried out, but more as a manifestation of a cult than a real attempt to change the outcome of the war. But the very idea that incantations could have been heard in the underground halls of Berlin as the Reich fell gives these last days a particularly dark and mystical tone. The mystery of the Black Mirrors, devices for meditation and divination found in archives. Among the many artifacts seized by the Allies after the fall of the Third Reich, a special place is occupied by the so-called Black Mirrors. These objects are described as smooth, round discs of dark glass or polished obsidian, which, according to eyewitnesses, were stored in the archives of the SS and the Ahnenerbe. Their purpose has not been officially established, but legends claim that they were used for meditation, predictions, and even for contact with other worlds. Historians associate these mirrors with the tradition of divination artifacts that existed in the occult schools of Europe and Asia. In mystical practices, dark mirrors were used as a tool for concentration and seeing. It was believed that a person who looked at their surface for a long time could enter a special state where pictures of the future or hidden secrets were revealed to him. For the Nazi elite, obsessed with finding ways to control fate, such devices were of particular value. Testimonies from former archive employees indicate that the mirrors were kept in special cases and were issued only for the duration of rituals. They involved high-ranking officers who would sit in darkened rooms and spend hours in silent contemplation. Sometimes candles would be lit nearby to make the reflections deeper, creating a sense of falling into another reality. Legends claim that the Nazis used these mirrors to try to predict the outcome of battles and the future of the Reich. Some stories say that in 1944, when the war turned into a disaster, images of destroyed cities and fleeing troops allegedly appeared in the mirrors. For some, this was a reason to stop the rituals. For others, proof of the need to continue the fight to the end. There are also more frightening versions. According to them, black mirrors were used not only for predictions, but also for contact with ancient forces. In these interpretations, the Nazis tried to summon the spirits of ancestors or even entities from other dimensions. Allied records contain reports of hallucinations and uncontrollable states experienced by participants in such practices. These may have been psychic effects of prolonged concentration, but to the mystics, they appeared as opening doors to other worlds. After the war, the fate of the mirrors remains a mystery. Some of them were allegedly taken away by the Americans, some by the Soviet troops. However, no photographs or documents confirming their existence were found. This gave rise to the theory that the artifacts disappeared as mysteriously as many other objects of the Ahnenerbe. Today, the story of the Black Mirrors is seen as a symbol of the dark side of the Third Reich, where science and mysticism merged into one. Even if these mirrors were ordinary obsidian discs, their role in SS rituals underscores the Nazis' willingness to use any means necessary to gain control over the future. And if the legends of visions and contacts are true, then they become one of the most sinister artifacts of the war. The theory that the fall of the Reich was a magical punishment for interfering with forbidden forces. The history of the fall of the Third Reich is usually explained by military and economic reasons. The superiority of the Allies, strategic mistakes, and the exhaustion of resources. But in the mystical tradition, there is another version. Germany's defeat was not only the result of human actions, but also a kind of punishment for interfering with forbidden forces. This theory arose shortly after the war and continues to excite researchers of the occult aspects of the Second World War. Proponents of this idea claim that the Nazi elite, obsessed with mysticism and the search for sacred energy, crossed the line. Expeditions to Tibet, rituals at Wewelsburg Castle, experiments with the bell and black mirrors. All this is perceived as an attempt to invade areas that were considered forbidden for centuries. In traditional cultures, such actions always ended in disaster for those who tried to subjugate forces superior to human ones. Legends say that in the final years of the war, SS rituals began to glitch. Officers allegedly complained of visions that predicted the fall of the Reich. In some cases, images of burning cities, ruins, and black-cloaked figures who carried off the souls of soldiers were mentioned. These stories were interpreted as signs that the powers the Nazis were appealing to had turned against them. Some researchers find parallels with myths about the curse of the pharaohs or ancient tales of priests who paid for their abuse of magic. In this logic, the fall of the Reich looked not just like a defeat in war, but like inevitable retribution. Even Hitler's suicide and the death of his closest associates are seen as part of a sacrificial ritual that completed the cycle of the curse. In post-war Germany, there were rumors that some of the officers who had participated in the mystical rites had died under strange circumstances. Some had died from illnesses resembling sudden exhaustion, while others had committed suicide for no apparent reason. These cases fueled the theory that a curse had spread to all who had participated in experiments with forbidden powers. Critics of this theory consider it merely a metaphor, convenient for explaining the collapse of Nazism. But for many people who lived through the war, the idea of magical punishment seemed convincing. It gave the feeling that justice had triumphed not only at the level of politics, but also at the level of higher spiritual laws. Today, the theory of magical punishment remains part of the dark mythology of World War II. It reminds us that attempts to use mysticism for power always end in tragedy. Perhaps the Reich fell solely because of military and economic logic. But in the eyes of those who believe in the power of the forbidden, its fall became an example of how even a powerful empire cannot resist laws that stand above man. I think you already agree that the mystical side of the Third Reich was not limited to the search for the Grail or secret expeditions. Rumors of submarines disappearing in the ocean, rituals in Berlin, and experiments with the weather paint a dark picture of an empire that tried to subjugate even the forces of nature and spiritual laws. These stories are part of the mythology of war, where reality and legend intertwine, leaving questions unanswered. Much of it may have been the fruit of fear and speculation, but it is these shadows that make the story even more disturbing and a reminder that power based on mysticism always leads to disaster.